Katie had always loved spending time in the woods near her home. The trees were tall and majestic, and the sound of the leaves rustling in the wind was soothing to her. But as she got older, she began to hear whispers of a haunted house that lay deep within the woods, a house that no one had ever returned from. One night, Katie was walking in the woods when she saw a light flickering in the distance. Curious, she decided to investigate. She walked towards the light, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. As she drew closer, she could see the outline of an old house. It was a decrepit, run-down building that looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The light was coming from a single candle flickering in the window. Katie stood there for a moment, trying to decide whether to approach the house or run away. But her curiosity got the better of her, and she slowly walked up to the front door. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The inside of the house was dark and musty. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the air was thick with dust. Katie could hear strange noises coming from the shadows, but she couldn't make out what they were. Suddenly, she heard footsteps coming from upstairs. She froze in fear as a shadowy figure descended the stairs. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, and he had a crazed look in his eyes. Katie tried to run, but the man was too quick. He grabbed her by the arm and dragged her towards a door in the back of the house. Katie could hear a low, guttural growling coming from behind the door. The man opened the door, and Katie saw a room filled with cages. Inside the cages were animals of all kinds: dogs, cats, rabbits, and even a few exotic creatures that she couldn't identify. Katie screamed as the man shoved her into one of the cages and locked the door. She was trapped, with no way to escape. The man cackled and walked away, leaving Katie to the mercy of the creatures in the room. As she sat there, trembling with fear, Katie realized that the animals were behaving strangely. They were growling and snarling, but it wasn't directed at her. They seemed to be looking at something in the shadows. And then she saw it. A dark, shadowy figure emerged from the corner of the room. It was a creature like she had never seen before, with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp teeth. The animals in the cages went wild, snarling and biting at the creature, but it seemed immune to their attacks. It approached Katie's cage, and she could feel its hot breath on her skin. Katie closed her eyes, resigned to her fate, but then she heard a voice. It was a young girl, calling out to her from the other side of the room. Katie opened her eyes and saw a small figure crouched in the corner. The girl was thin and pale, with long, tangled hair. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Katie called out to her, and the girl responded, telling her that she had been trapped in the house for weeks. Together, they hatched a plan to escape. They used a piece of wire to pick the lock on Katie's cage, and then they worked together to free the animals from their cages. The creatures swarmed around them, protecting them from the shadowy creature that still lurked in the shadows. They made their way to the front door and burst through it, running as fast as they could through the woods. As they ran, Katie and the girl could hear the sound of the shadowy creature pursuing them. They could hear its growls and snarls, getting closer and closer. They were almost out of the woods when they saw a beam of light in the distance. It was a group of people, searching for them. Katie and the girl ran towards the light, their hearts pounding with fear. As they approached, they could see that the people were a search party, led by a group of police officers. They had been searching for Katie and the girl, who had both been reported missing. Katie and the girl collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The police officers took them to safety, and they were soon reunited with their families. In the days that followed, Katie tried to make sense of what had happened to her. She had been trapped in the haunted house, but with the help of the girl and the animals, she had managed to escape. but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, something that was watching and waiting for its next victim. She knew that she would never be able to go back into the woods again. And as she lay in bed at night, she could hear the sound of the creature's growls in the distance, a haunting reminder of the horrors she had experienced in the house in the woods. Natalie and her husband, Jack, decided to take a romantic weekend getaway to a historic hotel in the countryside. They arrived late in the evening and were given a room on the top floor of the hotel, with a stunning view of the surrounding mountains. As they settled in for the night, they heard strange noises coming from the hallway. They dismissed it as other guests returning to their rooms, but the noises grew louder and more persistent as the night wore on. Natalie tried to fall asleep, but she felt a strange presence in the room. She could feel someone or something watching her, and it made her skin crawl. She tried to ignore it, but the feeling only grew stronger. Suddenly, she heard a woman's voice whispering in her ear. "Get out," the voice said. "You need to leave this room." Natalie sat up in bed, her heart racing. She woke Jack and told him what had happened, but he brushed it off, saying it was just her imagination. As they tried to fall back asleep, they heard footsteps in the hallway, but this time the footsteps stopped outside their door. They heard a faint knocking sound, followed by a low, guttural growling. Jack got out of bed and opened the door, but there was no one there. They tried to go back to sleep, but the noises continued. They heard voices, moaning, and scratching sounds coming from the walls. In the middle of the night, Natalie woke up to find Jack missing from the bed. She got up to look for him and found him standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at his reflection. "Jack, what are you doing?" she asked. But Jack didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on his reflection, and he seemed to be in a trance. Natalie tried to shake him out of it, but he wouldn't budge. Suddenly, she heard a woman's voice behind her. She turned around to see a ghostly figure standing in the corner of the room. The figure was a woman, dressed in a long white gown, with long black hair cascading down her back. Natalie screamed and tried to wake Jack, but he was still unresponsive. The ghostly figure started to move towards them, and Natalie realized that they were in grave danger. She grabbed Jack's arm and pulled him towards the door. As they rushed out of the room, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from behind them. They ran down the hallway, but the lights started to flicker and the air grew cold. When they reached the elevator, they saw the woman's ghostly figure standing in front of them, blocking their path. Natalie and Jack were trapped, with no way to escape. The ghostly figure reached out and touched Natalie's arm, and she felt a cold, clammy sensation on her skin. She could hear the woman's voice in her head, pleading with them to leave the hotel. Natalie and Jack were terrified, but they managed to break free from the ghost's grasp and ran down the stairs to the lobby. They told the hotel staff what had happened, but no one believed them. To this day, Natalie and Jack refused to ever stay in that hotel again. They never forgot the terrifying experience they had in that haunted hotel room, and they warned others to avoid it at all costs. Lena had just moved into an old Victorian house that had been in her family for generations. The house was beautiful, with ornate furnishings and antique fixtures, but there was something unsettling about it. Every room seemed to be imbued with an eerie energy that Lena couldn't quite put her finger on. One night, as Lena was getting ready for bed, she caught a glimpse of herself in the full-length mirror in her bedroom. But as she looked at her reflection, she noticed something strange. There was a faint outline of a figure standing behind her, its features blurred and indistinct. Lena turned around, but there was no one there. She shrugged it off as her imagination, but the next night, the same thing happened. This time, the figure was more defined, with a ghostly face that seemed to be staring back at her. Lena was terrified, but she couldn't bring herself to leave the house. She tried to ignore the figure in the mirror, but it was always there, lurking just out of sight. One day, while she was exploring the house, Lena discovered an old attic that had been sealed off for years. She opened the door and stepped inside, feeling a chill run down her spine. The room was dusty and cluttered with old furniture and boxes, but something caught Lena's eye. It was an old photograph, propped up on a dusty dresser. Lena picked up the photograph, and her heart skipped a beat. The figure in the photograph was the same one that she had been seeing in the mirror. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her face obscured by a veil. Lena was intrigued, but also afraid. Who was this woman, and why was she haunting her house? Lena began to do some research, poring through old family records and searching through archives. Finally, she found what she was looking for. The woman in the photograph was her great-grandmother, who had lived in the house nearly a century ago. According to family legend, the woman had died under mysterious circumstances, and her ghost was said to still haunt the house. Lena was terrified, but she knew that she had to confront the ghostly figure once and for all. She returned to her bedroom and stood in front of the mirror, calling out to the ghost. At first, there was no response. But then, Lena felt a cold breeze blow past her, and the figure in the mirror began to move. It stepped forward, its features becoming clearer with each passing moment. Finally, the figure was standing right in front of Lena, its ghostly face only inches from hers. Lena felt a wave of fear wash over her, but then, something unexpected happened. The figure reached out and touched Lena's face, its touch as cold as ice. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the ghostly figure vanished. Lena was left standing alone in front of the mirror, her heart racing with fear and excitement. She knew that the house would never be the same, but she also knew that she had made peace with the ghost that had haunted it for so long.